What's up, Vault Hunters? I'm Sh55, and this is a special edition of Ultimate Vault Hunters. Moxsy is back! What, that's not enough for you to get hype about? What if I told you that this time, Moxsy is bringing something rather unique to the table? A Moze build centered all around the newly unveiled purple tree. But it won't just feature Iron Cub. We've been told it will also feature a little fire and brimstone. What does that mean exactly? Stay tuned and find out. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and joining the conversation. Whether you're joining us on Twitch, YouTube, or Twitter, or listening along on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or Spotify, we thank you for tuning in and listening to the program. Our next episode is airing at our usual time, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on the official Borderlands Twitch and YouTube. Moxsy, how's it going? How you been?
It's going very well. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited to hear what you've got for us today.
Yes, it's amazing to be here.
Okay, so let's just go ahead and get into it. I got some questions for you to start the build out because not a lot of people are familiar with the new trees. And Moze, as well, all the characters have new trees, but we're going to go through Moze today. So what was the thought process behind how you determined which points you wanted to take in this tree?
So for this build, I wanted to mainly base it on a class mod and Anoint that I think myself and a lot of Moze players has always just like fantasized about using, but we're never actually capable with the Iron Bear Auto Bear setup that is now possible because for the first time in forever, Moze has a while action skill as active action skill, which didn't work with Auto Bear before. Now Moze can use the Anoint while an action skill is active. Grenade damage is increased by 150%, which is a direct boost to one of Moze's most powerful class mods, the Minesweeper. In Moze's new tree, there are a lot of skills that allow Moze to get bonus damage, bonus fire rate, bonus movement speed, and keep up Iron Cub at all times so that we can keep our damage up as long as possible. We have a little bit of focus on when Iron Cub does eventually go down because of diminishing returns on our skills to get it back as fast as possible. And then we're supplementing some utility on Iron Cub as well as a lot of fire damage and a lot of splash damage.
Wow, this sounds really exciting and new. Something that we haven't seen before.
Absolutely. That was so much fun to play around with.
So each tree has an overarching theme, be it action skill, damage, or utility. What does the purple tree focus on?
The purple tree focuses on status effects and Iron Cub.
Why should a player invest points in the purple tree over other existing trees?
So Iron Cub is very awesome in that it follows you around. It is a companion now that you can use for damage. You can use it for utility. But one of the greatest things about Iron Cub is there's no interrupt to your gameplay while playing with it. Some players didn't enjoy as much hopping in and out of Iron Bear for maybe proccing ASCs. It's very smooth. You just pull out Iron Cub. You can proc a lot of things that we're going to be using in this build for big damage increases and just keep up all of our damage skills for a very, very long time, which is just very nice to use.
Awesome. Yeah, getting in and out of Moze's Iron Bear is just for the action skill end is kind of, yeah. I mean, like when you're working with flak or something, fadeaway is like 30 seconds, no big deal, and you got action skill end super quickly, but this is awesome. Okay, so why should a player take the new action skill Iron Cub over other skills?
Iron Cub is... Well, first off, it's very cute, but Iron Cub as an action skill, one will follow you around, meaning versus Auto Bear, which stayed in place. For example, if you were using Auto Bear with a melee augment, Iron Bear would just sit there, it wouldn't punch anything because it wouldn't go up to enemies. Now you have Iron Cub, which will actually follow you around the corner and be not only a draw of aggro, but also a companion. And then it synergizes really well with using things of the while action skill active anoints, which once again, Moze couldn't use, which adds a lot of diversity into the anoints that she could use and also her general playstyle.
Isn't there some anoint where you can get like 200% extra damage while action skill is active or something like that?
Yes, the 200% weapon damage while action skill is active. Very cool anoint. Moze couldn't use that period before. It just did not work because as soon as you hopped out of Iron Bear, your action skill was over. That's no longer the case.
But now it's viable. Cool. Cool. This is awesome. How does Moze's second action skill slot work with Iron Cub?
So the way it works with Iron Cub is that Iron Cub will take up either the left or right slot. You have 4 different augments to augment the way that Iron Cub works. And then in the green tree, red tree, blue tree, the base Moze skills or trees, they all have weapons in them. Whatever weapon you equip to Iron Cub, it'll get 2 of. So you pick one weapon and it'll just double it on actual Iron Cub.
Okay, so you can't equip Iron Cub in both slots for double Iron Cub action?
No double Iron Cubs.
Shoot. All right, so of the existing trees, which other tree does the new one synergize best with?
I found it to synergize really well with the Demolition Woman blue tree. Demolition Woman gives a lot of passives and buffs, not only to Iron Bear, which work with Iron Cub, but also has some of the hardest hitting splash damage and fire damage skills in the game. We don't need the red tree, don't need to worry about our shields, and we're using some of the talents in the purple tree and some things with terror to supplement for any sort of ammo regen or fire rate issues that you'd think you'd run into.
Cool. So the blue tree will be featured in today's build?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So in the pre-show, you mentioned this build will be featuring the terror mechanic with this build.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for those who may not know, what is Bloody Harvest's terror mechanic?
So terror mechanic is if you do not have any terror anoints on you, when terror is applied to you, you suffer decreased accuracy and handling. However, if you have an anoint that uses or consumes terror in some way, instead of getting debuffed by it, you can actually turn it into a passive buff for yourself. With Iron Cub staying active all the time, there isn't a great use for an immediate damage burst, such as on action skill end, because you're not gonna, for bossing, for example, if you proc Iron Bear, your Iron Cub duration is very long, so you don't get those immediate boosts that, for example, action skill end would work with. But we can use terror annoyance, which are great for while we're action skill is active, to supplement some of that damage.
Awesome. How many levels of terror are there?
There's 3 levels of terror. They stack on you.
Fantastic. Just so everybody knows. How can a player obtain the terror debuff when Bloody Harvest is no longer active?
As long as you find gear or farm gear while the Bloody Harvest event is active, which it still is, your gear will carry over after the event ends. You need to find something that will either melee terror apply or on action skill end apply. For this, we're going to be using the melee terror anoint because, like I said earlier, action skill end isn't as great here. Mm-hmm. So melee terror is a great way to apply terror to ourselves while our action skill is active so that we can get the most amount of buffs.
Awesome. I can't wait to see the build.
So we're going to start in the new tree, purple tree, pig tree, bear mother, and the first skill that we're maxing out is going to be Big Surplus. While Moze's action skill is cooling down, she deals bonus incendiary damage, bonus damage plus 15% of gun damage. The main reason for picking this up is because we have the most damage while Iron Bear or Bear Cub is active, and we're going Grizzled, which killing an enemy reduces Moze's remaining action skill cooldown time. That's a blue tree skill. So the more damage that we have when Iron Cub is not active and on cooldown, the faster we can get it back because we'll kill enemies faster. So awesome pick up there. The next skill we're picking up is Biofuel. Whenever Moze or Iron Bear reignites or ignites an enemy, they both regenerate health for a short time. This is just a small amount of passive health regen, and mainly moving down to the next part of the tree.
Okay.
The next skill that we're picking up is Double Time. While Moze's action skill is active, she and Iron Bear gain increased movement speed.
Ooh.
Yes, and our Iron Cub is going to be active for like a few minutes. So having this extra movement speed is really, really nice. But we're also using Minesweepers, which have a very big explosive radius. They're the grenades that drop when you crit an enemy. And so having movement speed to move away from enemies to distance yourself, it's just really nice to have. The next skill we're going is Harmonious Havoc. Now this is like Match Set, which was a skill is a skill in Moze's Green Tree, that when you match items, you get more mag size. Harmonious Havoc is whenever Moze gains increased gun damage for each weapon, shield, or grenade that matches the element of her gun. Now, it's just a little bit of extra bonus gun damage per matching. I'm not super stressed about everything having to match because it's nice in this game to have different elements of each things, but a little bit of extra gun damage there is always nice to have. And we do use a lot of fire weapons because this tree definitely focuses on igniting enemies and doing fire damage. The next skill we're picking up is called Explosive Fury. Moze and Iron Bear gain increased status effect damage and status effect chance. Now, status effect chance is the main reason we want this. A lot of this skill tree has to do with when you ignite or when you apply status effect, you're going to get a ton of buffs. The frequency of that happening by boosting our chance is really, really nice. There's a pretty cool trick that we can do with ignition in a second that I'll get into, but having those status effect chance is really, really nice, even though status effect damage isn't as impactful at Mayhem 10.
Okay.
The next skill we're getting is Fired Up. Whenever Moze or Iron Bear applies a status effect to an enemy, she gains increased fire rate for a short time. This effect stacks. This is a 1/1 middle tree capstone, or middle tree, like 1/1 point. That is extremely strong because it stacks 5 times. You're going to be able to get 25% fire rate.
Ooh.
When you apply a status effect, which is really, really nice. Cool thing about Fired Up and this whole tree is that it works off of self dots. So one of the strategies that I will do is I will shoot myself with a sellout, a weapon that you get from Tyrene during the main story that has a 72% chance to ignite you when you shoot it at your foot. You shoot this thing at your foot, it's going to buff your fire rate like crazy. And then you shoot at the boss. And we can also pair that with an elemental projector, which is going to give us multiplicative elemental damage increase with the element that we're suffering, which will be fire. So we ignite ourselves, we're going to get increased elemental damage, and we're also going to get a huge fire rate burst, which is just very, very nice to have.
Ooh, and paired with the terror build. Can't wait.
Yeah.
I'm jumping the gun a little bit. I'm excited about it.
The next thing that we're going is Never Going to Give You Up. Great skill name. Whenever Moze or Iron Bear applies a status effect to an enemy, Iron Bear gains fuel. This skill has diminishing returns. This is one of the best skills to pick up because we're going to be applying status effects a lot, and this skill will give fuel return up to 25%, which after like a minute or two isn't going to be affecting much, but for your first minute at least of using this, Iron Cub will always have full bar because you'll be applying status effects, keeps it up longer, keeps our damage going longer. For example, this build in the Guardian Takedown, I was able to keep Iron Cub up for the entire crystal phase, all 3 crystals. Wow. So you can get some pretty good, and through the next room as well, you can get some pretty good uptime on Iron Cub, especially with the skill, and our skill we'll talk about in a second.
Okay.
Next pickup is Nitrodium Engines. Iron Bear gains increased maximum fuel and action skill cooldown rate because Never Going to Give You Up is going to give us percentage based of our fuel. The more base fuel that we start with, the more effective that skill is going to be because it's going to return a percentage of our max.
Right.
So getting more max fuel is just going to allow our Iron Cub to stay active longer, which is really, really nice to have. And then next skill we only put 4 out of 5 into that because we're putting 1 point into Limit Break. Moze gains increased action skill cooldown rate when she or Iron Bear inflict a status effect on the enemy. This effect stacks. I only put 1 point here because our cooldown rate when Iron Cub is off is honestly already really good. And we're just going to be applying the status effects by playing normally. You don't got to do anything outside of what you'd already be doing. So just a little bit of extra cooldown rate on top of that, which stacks up to 10 times. So I'm only putting 1 point here, but if I'm applying a status effect, I'm going to get up to 40% cooldown reduction or cooldown rate on this.
Wow.
So 1 point is honestly plenty. And it's 1 out of 3 skill. So that works out great. And lastly, the capstone of this tree running on fumes. Whenever Moze or Iron Bear ignites an enemy, Iron Bear does not consume fuel for a short time. Duration is 6 seconds. This capstone is the icing on the cake of all of the other things that we've done because Iron Bear just won't consume fuel for 6 seconds and gives us crazy duration and uptime on our Iron Cub, which once again is important because we're using the Minesweeper and we're using action skill active 150 grenade damage, so that the longer or while our action skill is up, we're going to get way more damage.
This is awesome. Cool.
The augment that we're using in that tree is Efficiency Engine. It's the last augment you unlock. Moze gains increased damage. The longer Iron Cub has been active, the greater the bonus. So Iron Cub will be active for a very long time. Efficiency Engine is just going to give us more damage the longer Iron Cub is active, which synergizes beautifully with what we're trying to achieve here.
Fantastic.
Next up in the blue tree, the first skill I'm going for is Fire in the Skagden. Whenever Moze deals splash damage, she deals bonus incendiary damage. Now, we benefit greatly from igniting things, so we're going to get bonus incendiary damage on top of all of our other damage whenever we're doing splash. And we're mainly doing using splash weapons. One thing that's pretty crazy here about the Minesweeper is the Minesweeper that I'm using is rolled 1 into Redistribution and 4 into Fire in the Skagden. Fire in the Skagden gets mayhem scaling at 9 out of 5. We're going to be sitting at around, I think it's just under 900% increased bonus incendiary damage on every splash damage. With the mayhem scaling, this is one of the strongest skills in the game. And it's crazy. Part of the reason that we're able to do so much damage and do all this fire damage is because this gets mayhem scaling and does a awesome amount of fire damage. And the Minesweeper is one of the only comms besides the Rocketeer that can actually boost Fire in the Skagden. Also, all of those grenades that are proccing are going to get Fire in the Skagden. So all of the damage that they're doing, because their splash damage, is going to also get bonus incendiary damage. Every time that a Minesweeper procs, Minesweepers, they scale off the original damage that caused them. And if they proc again, they take that original damage, reapply all of your splash damage bonuses, proc again. So you get this like crazy exponential curve of damage once you start procking them. And that's how we're able to kill enemies with like a shot or two. Graveward, because there's a cascade of Minesweeper grenades that just only increase in damage as time goes on.
Wow. All right. Whew.
Yeah.
A lot of damage.
Next, this is my motto.
I was going to say, Damage Nation. Let's go.
The next thing we're picking up is Deadlines. Firing Iron Bear weapons drain less fuel. Killing an enemy while Iron Bear is active increases fuel. Ooh. This skill is amazing for Iron Cub because we're going to be melting things. And since Iron Cub is going to be active, we're just going to be giving it more and more fuel. So this just adds into all of the things that keep Iron Cub active for extremely long periods of time so that we never have to lose any damage. Next skill, Grizzled. Killing enemy reduces Moze's remaining action skill cooldown time. This skill has diminishing returns. This skill, as well as our cooldown rate from the status effects, is going to give us our crazy fast cooldown. While playing this and using it well, I was getting Iron Cub cooldown to like 10 seconds. So we're able to upkeep Iron Cub a lot of the time. And as we're going to be killing a lot of things, and it just works great. Next up, we're going Beads of Destruction. Whenever Moze deals splash damage, there's a chance to add ammo to a currently equipped weapons magazine with a smaller chance to return a grenade.
Ooh.
This is an amazing skill for Moze, and with that in redistribution is really all the ammo regen that we need. But it's going to refund our grenades, which we're going to be using for healing, and also return ammo to our magazine, which allows us to keep firing. The less we have to reload, the higher our DPS will be. So awesome skill. Toward cross promotion, all splash damage dealt by Moze has a chance to double in size. Additionally, Moze and Iron Bear deal increased splash damage. More splash damage radius, more nuking of all the enemies. Great skill there.
Whew.
Pull the Holy Pin. Moze's grenades have a chance to score a critical hit. This is really, really important for the Minesweeper comm because they're grenades, and those grenades can crit, and Minesweeper procs off of crits. So if you don't have the skill, you can't chain Minesweepers.
Okay.
So Minesweeper, chance to crit. Our grenades have a chance to crit. When we proc a Minesweeper, there is a chance that it's going to crit. If it does, it'll send another Minesweeper grenade, and that's what leads to the crazy damage cascade. So definitely need points there. Vampire is going to heal us off of our grenades. We're using Cloning Mine Tracker, which on one throw spawns 24 child grenades that track, and we're getting 12% of our missing health per grenade hit. So we can full heal on grenade, but our Minesweepers that are proccing on every crit also heal us, so we have some pretty good survivability. The only thing that will down you with this build is your own self damage, which can happen. Which is
splash damage.
Yeah, why that movement speed is nice. You can get away from those grenades.
Cool, fair.
And lastly, we're using Short Fuse. Whenever Moze deals gun damage, there's a chance of a secondary explosion centered on the target. This skill also gets mayhem scaling, reapplies all of your splash damage bonuses, and also works with 390 Anoint.
Ooh.
And hits really, really hard. When you spawn in, you're guaranteed a Short Fuse proc. So your first shot after spawning in is 100% guaranteed Short Fuse proc. You put on 390 weapon with that, which 390 also increases the damage of Minesweepers, and it also increases the damage of Short Fuse times 4. Your first shot is enough to kill most enemies and bosses off the spawn, which is
wow.
great.
Okay, so that's 2 capstones. What else is there for us to spec into?
Yes, we're only putting 1 point into the red tree, which is it is Security Bear. Now, Security Bear normally gives Iron Bear a shield. For this Iron Cub, it says if Iron Bear is equipped, it gains damage reduction 1 point. It's going to give Iron Cub plus 50% damage reduction, which is just really, really nice. And it's the first point in the tree. It's definitely like just worth that 1 point, and gonna give our Iron Cub more damage reduction. And then we're putting our last points into the green tree, where we're getting Cloud of Lead. Moze and Iron Bear shots will deal incendiary damage and won't consume ammo. This is nice because more bonus incendiary damage, and whenever we or Iron Bear proc a status effect or ignite, Iron Bear doesn't consume fuel, so Iron Bear can be proccing its own fuel regen with this and other skills, which is great. Stoke the Embers increases Moze and Iron Bear's incendiary damage plus 30% on top of all of the incendiary damage that we already had. We're grabbing redistribution. We have 2 at a 1 point with our skill points, which is going to give us 10% of our ammo regen per second when we proc a crit, which is incredible. The capstone in bottomless mags only gives you 5% of your magazine per second. This tier 2 skill is going to give us 10% of our magazine, which is amazing. And we're going to be critting a ton because our grenades proc 24 child grenades, and each of those have a chance to crit. This allows us to have crazy ammo regen without actually speccing very much into the green tree at all. And it also gives us 5% of our missing health per second on top of that. So great. And then our very last point, we're putting into Dock Bear. Dock Bear, normally the skill that you have to hop on Iron Bear's back to shoot a man turret. If you spec this with Iron Cub, it's just going to give Iron Cub plus 20% damage. We're already there. It's just 1 out of 1 point, and we only have 1 point to spend. it just works out. And lastly, for the augments for this, I was enjoying using Iron Cub as like utility bear, using it with the target softening. In my other slot of my action skill, we're going to be getting 15% damage increase, or basically kind of like slag. Enemies take plus 15% damage. Our Iron Cub is going to be active for a very long time, shooting all of these pods out and just increasing the damage that all enemies are going to take. Just a nice utility thing.
That's in the blue tree.
Yeah, that's it. That's in the blue tree. Okay. And yeah, that's it for the skill points.
Cool. Well, thank you. That's crazy. How long does Iron Cub stay up?
I would say on average between like 3 and 4 minutes at least.
Wow.
It depends. The more enemies you're killing, the more enemies that you have to kill, the longer it'll stay up. If you're like in between sections, it'll go down. But for example, in the Guardian Takedown, where there's enemies swarming you, it just won't go down.
Wow. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. The one that makes it its fuel not deplete for 6 seconds when you kill an enemy.
And
that's just insane.
We kill an enemy, we're replenishing its fuel. So,
oh my god,
it's kind of always there.
It seems really OP. I can't wait to see it in action. This is really awesome. Okay, so we already went over the augments. What would you say the main rotation of this build is?
So the reason I included Terror is in terms of our grenade slot is taken. It's while action skill is active, grenade damage increased by 150%. For shield anoints, there's basically on action skill end anoints or on action skill start. On action skill start, we proc our bear, we proc it, and it'll happen for a second. And then we have 4 minutes of nothing. On action skill end, only happens like once every 4 minutes, 3 minutes. Yeah. So there isn't that much that we can get besides terror annoyance, which I use a melee figs puncher, which will give us terror for like 18 seconds. Not something you totally need to use, and sometimes I won't, but in terms of put a slot to do something with, I'll use a face puncher with apply terror. Shoot the face puncher once, gonna get a buff for like 15 seconds. And then I'm using the anoint on my shield while terrified, gain increased damage and fire rate. The damage is 35% and the fire rate I think is 21%. But that damage is applies to everything. So that increased damage is it's not gun damage. It'll apply to our minesweepers. It'll apply to our grenades. It'll apply to Iron Cub. So in terms of bang for our buck, it's great. And definitely not a necessary step because we're already killing everything so quickly, but just the best use of that slot and of terror that we get with this build, because I tried it with the terror ammo regen and it didn't need it.
Interesting. All right, cool. So what damage builds exist out there that could compare in numbers to this build?
In terms of Moze, like Minesweeper builds, this is the highest damage we've ever been able to get because of the 150. And Minesweeper has uncapped damage as long as it chains. With this build, you could throw a white grenade at Grave Ward, and if you're lucky, because it's a chance to proc and then a chance to proc again, you kill Grave Ward with one white grenade throw. So the damage potential is bananas, but the only other build that I use that has this much crazy bossy damage probably Gamebreaker Amara.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Cool. That's a lot of damage. Okay, so while we have you here, how did this build fare overall with the True Guardian Takedown? You mentioned it before, but let's go over it again. What about the crystal activation sections?
It went really, really well. I used Plague Bears for large mob clearing, and Iron Cub doesn't provide the same super hard aggro while an auto bear, but it aggroed like a lot of the enemies, so I could just sit there with a rocket launcher, shoot my rocket launchers, and not really worry too much about the other enemies, which was really nice because you have aggro relief. Because when things get in your face on Moze, you tend to go down with your own splash damage.
Yeah.
So it worked out really, really well. And then our bossing damage is gross. So yeah, it went quite well.
So did it take the damage, or did it take aggro away from the crystals? So you could just like aim at Iron Cub, or?
Yeah, it didn't. So, for example, the enemies that have, I forget what they're called. I just call them foreheads, but the ones with the big like explosion on them, they will target you. But if you have normal Iron Bear, they'll go for Auto Bear. They were still targeting me, so it wasn't the same level of aggro relief, but it was pretty good that I could just focus on distancing and killing enemies.
The Scions, by the way.
Scions, yes.
Scions. Okay, so what about Anathema?
The only issue that you'll run into is things getting in your face because we do so much splash damage.
Yeah.
And if an enemy runs at you and you have a tracking grenade, the tracking grenade will follow the enemy, and then the enemy isn't what ends up killing you. It's the grenade. It's kind of been a Moze thing
issue
for a while, but as long as you're not using some of the modifiers that, for example, the cryo orbs are a really big no-no on this build, because when I play with the cryo orbs, you're not really targeting because they're cryo orbs, but the grenades will target them. Cryo orbs will float towards you, and then your grenades will track the cryo orbs, which is pain. So there are some modifiers that I definitely recommend not using. But
we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, overall, it did just fine.
Cool. All right. What about Scourge, the Invincible Martyr?
Not really issues either.
Just took him down.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do damage. That's my job. Okay, so what do you feel this build excels at the most?
Bossing. Definitely bossing. Yeah. It's great at mobbing, and is definitely geared very well towards mobbing, but Minesweepers and the damage burst that they can provide on bossing is extremely powerful. And another thing that Moze has never ever been able to use, which she can now use, is the Elemental Projector artifact, which is one of the most powerful artifacts in the game. Moze, prior, you have to be suffering from an elemental status effect. If you wanted to switch to you'd have to like hop into Iron Bear, hop out, and then you'd switch weapons to like the sellout to shoot, and you wouldn't get the anoint on your weapon because you would have had to switch weapons that you can't get the sellout anointed. So you could never use that. With this build, you basically pop yourself in the foot for like the most damage. You proc Elemental Projector. You're gonna proc that fire rate bonus, and then you let out like a trigger pull with the Sandhawk, and you make sure that Iron Cub is active, and things will just melt.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, Sandhawk. Is there some spoilers for guns that we're going to be talking about later as well? So let's talk about the skill tree for a minute. How do you feel about the 5 points recently added to the game alongside Psycho Krieg and the Fantastic Fustercluck?
I'm glad we got those 5 points. They're, for like this build, those extra 5 points would let us get a few small of those 1-out-of-1 pickups, but I'm glad that we're not getting that the level cap is staying the same for these new skill trees, because the less skill points you have and the more options there are, the larger the diversity is ultimately with making builds. And without this new skill tree, they were starting to get a lot of overlap between builds. And so now we have a ton new skills, ton new ways to play, and no more points, which ultimately I think is great because it just adds so much more now diversity. We have a Moze build with items and gear that we've never ever been able to use, which is awesome.
Yeah. So do you feel this build stood to benefit greatly from having these 5 points?
everything that we're needed to get, this build could pick up without the 5 points. But having 5 extra points is kind of like half of our green tree, which we get a lot of damage from.
Right.
And that's probably what would have had to been sacrificed here. And so those points into like incendiary damage and so would have had to been lost, which would have been a big bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, that does make sense. So just as a hypothetical, if if you had 4 more points to add to your talent tree, where would they go?
Those 4 more points would probably just continue on in the green tree. I'd grab rushing offensive, which Moze can sprint and shoot at the same time while sprinting. Moze's weapons gain lifesteal. Ooh. Now that skill works for any source of damage, whether it be dots, whether it be iron cub. So we were very close to being able to get this skill. It's a nice little point to have because if you sprint around, you're going to lifesteal, even if you're not the one doing damage. If Iron Cub is doing the damage, you're going to lifesteal from that. So definitely go with that. And then those last points into scorching RPMs for fire rate and critical hit damage and Iron Bear damage.
Ooh, yeah, for sure. Fantastic. Okay, so what weapons and gear will be utilized in this build?
For weapons, as long as it does splash damage, you can do some work with it. My favorites are the Sandhawk for bossing. The Sandhawk does elemental damage, does splash damage, and has a crazy high fire rate as well as a pellet count. So you could hold down the Sandhawk trigger for a second or two. You'll get a lot of pellets out, and because our minesweepers are on chance of crit to proc, the more pellets we have, the better chances are of actually getting one of those things to proc. And as you can see, hopefully in some of the footage, when you shoot some pellets out and one of those minesweepers does trigger, the boss's health just goes.
Awesome. So where can we get the Sandhawk?
Sandhawks can be found at Katagawa Jr. As Mayhem 6 or higher. Make sure you're on Mayhem 6 or higher. That's one of my main bossing weapons. One of the main mobbing weapons, you can use this for bossing as well, is the Flipper. Splash Malawan SMG. Really strong. All the shots do splash damage. All of the shots do get skagged in. And you also have a chance to proc short fuse with it, but its low fire rate is actually great because we have so much ammo regen, but not like a crazy amount that we never actually have to reload this thing, even though we're hardly spec'd into the green tree. So it also has a ton of pellets that come out of it, which will make it easier to hit crits. It's a really strong Moze weapon and works extremely well on this build. Other weapons are the Plague Bearer, the Ion Cannon, the Blood-Starved Beast, the Tiggs Boom, high pellet count times 18, Torg Shotgun, also really good. 18 pellets that all do splash damage, all do elemental damage. Will proc a ton of minesweepers. Things like the Beacon, the splash damage pistol are also really good. And that's about it for weapons. Also, utility weapons are the Sellout and the Face Puncher.
Utility weapons, and what the utility would be?
The Face Puncher I'm using with melee attacks that have a chance to apply terror to yourself as our way to apply terror, and the Sellout as a low damage weapon that you can shoot yourself in the foot to you proc that fire rate. You can also proc your one of the skills that we had was allowing you, whenever Moze or Iron Bear apply status effect, Iron Bear gains fuel. So like you can also like shoot yourself in the foot and gain back Iron Bear time. Oh, wow. So those are great utility weapons.
Where do you get the Sellout from?
It's from a quest called Sellout during the main story on Eden 6 from Tyrene.
Great. Okay, so that's something that somebody should get like on their way leveling up and just keep in their bank, right? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So what anointments should players aim for? So
the anointments for bossing that I really like are the 390 anoint. Applies to short fuse, applies to your grenades, and applies to the pellets that you hit an enemy with. That's really strong. The other anointments that I use mainly, you can use consecutive hits, which is always great, especially with all of our status effects. Consecutive hits procs off of status effect ticks. So with all of the dots that we're applying, those consecutive hits is going to stack up to 200% damage really quickly. The while action skill is active, 200% damage is also really good. You just have to note that if you switch weapons, you break that anoint for the duration of Iron Cub.
Oh, that sounds.
Yeah, been your Iron Cub's out for a really long time. So as long as you don't switch weapons, you're good there, and you're going to get consistent 200% weapon damage. But for the most part, I've been using consecutive hits. The while auto bear is active, 130. Also cool thing, synergize as well with the build for that extra incendiary damage. Unfortunately, because we're not really using action skill and anoints, doesn't really synergize with action skill ends. The like splash damage, action skill and splash damage you can't use, but we can make up for it with other things.
Cool. So what gear, if anything, would you consider essential?
Definitely recommend getting a flipper and a sand hawk.
Okay,
Mobbing, bossing done. Flippers from Venusaur in DLC 3, Blood Sun Canyon. The other gear that I mentioned, I use a Minesweeper class mod, very important for this build. I use a cloning maddening tracker, which is a purple Atlas grenade. Been around for a long time. Started using it back in like my first Firestarter Moze build, long time ago. But the cloning maddening tracker splits into more grenades and homes on enemies, which is great for proccing Minesweepers and healing us. Definitely recommend. Best way to get one is to vendor farm, vendor farming or slaughter shaft. I use the old god, which is going to give me plus 20% incendiary damage increase, which we don't have a lot of multiple elemental damage increases. And no matter what kind of element we're using, we're always going to be doing incendiary damage. So that's just a great increase to our incendiary damage and our damage overall. And then our artifact is very flexible. I'll use like a Snowdrift Victory Rush or an Elemental Projector Victory Rush. You can also throw an Auto Idol there. More importantly, the rolls are you want area of effect damage, magazine size, and whatever else. Just great passives to have.
Okay,
but
great.
Area effect damage on artifact, splash damage on your class mod, and you're good to go.
Okay, so we went over the artifacts and your grenade. What about shield? What shield do you use?
The old guy. It's from DLC 3. Yeah.
Okay, great. Will this build work if you don't have the proper weapons and gear yet?
Yeah, but the Minesweeper and the wall action skill active grenade damage are kind of the whole reason that why we went this way. Okay. Moze's base damage with just fire in the Skag Den getting almost like 900% bonus incendiary damage on shots is enough to carry you. Right. Especially with short fuse, but in order to really get the full synergy here, definitely recommend getting this gear.
All right, great. What options will players have to make this build work once Bloody Harvest has ended?
So the Terra Anoint, as long as you get them now, they'll last forever. And because we're not using like a damaging weapon with this, a face puncher, whether it be level 2 or level 65, as long as you have the melee attack supply terror, it'll always work for you. And you can always use the terrified anoints. So it's nice to have. Once again, definitely not necessary, but in terms of options there, it was just the best one to fill the shield slot.
What would be a suitable stopgap until I have the optimal loot needed? So like if I don't have the face puncher, is it just something with the terror anoint on it specifically?
The face puncher is just nice because it has the melee attack supply terror, and the face puncher does apply or does melee damage, so you don't have to like get in anything's face to proc it. Cool. Any weapon would work, but that would require you to run up and punch something, and Moze isn't about that.
Okay, so what Guardian rank talent should players focus on to get the most bonus stats for this build?
Some nice pickups in the Guardian ranks are Tag and Frag, regenerate a grenade every 10 kills. It's just extra grenade regen on top of means of destruction. The topped off action skill cooldown rate increases while at full shields, gives us a crazy powerful action skill regeneration. Without that, our action skill cooldown is definitely a lot longer. And then overkill, giving us overkill damage because we're going to be hitting so hard, is really, really nice to transfer damage. And hollow point also gets mayhem scaling. Whenever you kill an enemy with a critical hit, causes an explosion around them. That just adds to the craziness because we're going to be critting a lot and we're going to be doing all this explosions, and hollow point gets mayhem scaling. So that just adds even more damage on top of everything.
Awesome. So what guardian rank talents, if any, should a player disable to use this build?
There is not that you need to disable.
When spending a guardian token, what are the stats players should focus on spending their tokens to obtain for maximum min-max potential?
For this specific build, grenade damage, critical damage, elemental damage, fire rate, reload speed are all great bonuses to have.
You're not going to have, this isn't going to be like an infinite ammo Moze?
We kind of achieve infinite ammo just off of our base skills, but we don't actually suffer anything from reloading besides just reloading. Okay. So it's not super crazy on just shooting any weapon and never having to reload because we're more focused on some damage skills. But with the ammo regen that we're getting just off of the few skills that we do have, it honestly works really, really well.
Okay. So Bounty of Blood introduced 3 new talents into the Guardian rank tree: Groundbreaker, Dead Man Walking, and Lead or Alive. If you had to pick one to focus on getting first for this build, which would it be?
Probably Dead Man Walking, just in case you do go into Fight for Your Life. While not moving Fight for Your Life, your meter drains 50% more slowly. You can use your Face Puncher to proc Groundbreaker. Lead or Alive doesn't matter too much for us, but just in case you do go down to your own splash damage, which happens, we make mistakes, you're less punished for going to Fight for Your Life. You got more time in it.
Okay. All right, cool. Are there any mayhem modifiers that one should keep an eye out for that will enhance this build?
There is, yes, absolutely. The More Than Okay Boomer increases our grenade damage by 25%, which we're doing a lot of grenade damage from our Minesweepers because those count as grenade damage. That and enemies also drop grenade ammo, which is just icing on the cake, is a great modifier. I'll either use that or Speed Demon for just, I like moving fast. And even though More Than Okay Boomer is definitely more damage, it's still nice to have that extra bonus movement speed.
Are there any mayhem modifiers that one should avoid?
Yes. Avoid freeze tag, like the plague.
That's the one with the cryo orbs.
Yeah, the cryo orbs will chase after you. Your grenades will chase the cryo orbs, and your grenades end up killing you.
But that's the only one. We're good with the rest of them. What about death? Yeah. Is the I can't remember what it's called. The one that's when you kill something. Yeah, postmortem. Yeah, it's death will come at you. Do your grenades track that as well?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay.
That one is fine to use because when it spawns, it's spawning out of a dead enemy, and usually we're doing big explosions on enemies that are dying. So postmortem skulls have a tendency to die as we're still shooting, which is nice because we have all this splash damage radius. However, I'll either use that buddy system or not the face.
Okay, cool. How'd you test this build?
I ran it on the Malawan takedown. A lot is where I do my testing.
Okay. What were some of your initial impressions when you tested this build?
That's a lot of damage.
I mean, it is your motto for a reason. What did the numbers look like compared to similar builds, both ones you have crafted and ones you've seen other community members display?
The numbers on bossing is very, very strong. Minesweepers already were one of the strongest bossing setups for Moze, and it's basically getting 150% damage increase. So Minesweepers can be hitting for over 1 billion damage without too much investment.
Really?
They scale off of the damage that triggers them. So if you have a 390 ion cannon, for example, that'll land proc a Minesweeper. There's not really an enemy in the game that has enough health to like survive that. So you don't get to see as much damage as you probably would have liked, but that'll just about one-shot everything.
Nice. Cool. So do you feel there are any changes that Gearbox could make to the game that would further refine this build without making it drastically over or underpowered?
The 200% active or 200 gun damage while action skill active anoint has amazing synergy with this build. Unfortunately, can easily be broken by swapping weapons. And even if you swap back to the weapon that you originally procced it with, it no longer works. So having that as a slightly more usable anoint and not having to worry about that would be really, really nice without having to like change too much. Just add another really, really awesome damage tool to this build.
That totally makes sense. I get that. Are we already at the end? Okay, so I guess that's it. This has been so crazy awesome. Thank you for taking us through the new purple skill tree. Bear Cub is super cute, and I really can't wait to see a whole lot more from you, more builds. There's going to be so much more that you can do now that we have a fourth skill tree in place.
It's so exciting.
Thank you so much for joining us and coming on the show. Is there a build that maybe you can take 15 seconds to tease for your next appearance? Maybe Amara? I don't know.
The new Amara skill tree is absolutely wild. The things that you can do with it. it's one of the best, craziest skill trees I've ever seen in a Borderlands game, and I cannot wait to experiment with it.
Awesome. Do you have a name for anything? Just like a tease?
I took Game Breaker and made it way better.
How do you
I don't have a name
once
for
you've
it.
made a game breaker?
It's a good question.
Wow. I can't wait to see it. And thank you so much for being here. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an immense honor and so much fun. And I'm really, really happy that I had the opportunity not only to do this, but also share my insights, and really, really blessed to have this. Thank you.
Oh, you're so sweet. And set the precedent, really, for Moze. This is awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on the show. And thank you, Moxsy, for joining as well. This has been amazing. Moxsy, where can we find you on the internet?
Moxsy is my YouTube, Moxsy OG Twitter handle, Moxsy on Twitch, and Moxsy OG on Instagram. You can find me.
Moxsy for us.
Yes, Moxsy. You can find me doing damage across all those channels there.
I look forward to checking out your YouTube as well. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of builds ready for us when this goes live. So.
Oh boy.
And you can find me. I'm Sh55, SCHVIFTYFIVE, all over the internet. Moxsy's new build, Firestarter Moze, will rain hellfire upon your enemies with a huge assist from her new action skill, Iron Cub. Your enemies won't have a ghost of a chance when you instill terror in them. For bringing us a build that is frankly unholy, I once again award Moxsy with the title Ultimate Vault Hunter.
Thank you.
My pleasure. The much discussed fourth skill trees will be out soon. Iron Cub looks to be a mean addition to Moze's kit, and the tree that follows will add much needed versatility and damage to her playstyle. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you soon on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and SoundCloud. If you'd like more details about this build, you can find a link to more information and the build in the podcast description section. Happy looting to all you Ultimate Vault Hunters out there.